As always, there was no shortage of content coming out of the nation's capital this week, and for more on that and a closer analysis, I'm joined by federal political reporter at The Australian, Olivia Caisley. Liv, thanks so much for your time today. With the Prime Minister on annual leave earlier this week, Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack was filling his shoes. It was a bit of a rocky first few days. How did he recover?
It was a bit of a rocky week, actually, for Michael McCormack. I actually spoke to him last Sunday in Wagga, and he made some comments about the state border closures being sort of disproportionate for regional Australia, and those comments were actually received really positively by some of his biggest critics in the Nationals Party. But that kind of positivity was pretty short-lived, and within a couple of days he made those comments where he likened the pro-Trump US insurrection on the US Capitol to the Black Lives Matter movement. He used the controversial catchcry, All Lives Matter. Yeah. Again, he backed or defended Nationals MPs, George Christensen and Craig Kelly. So he put his foot in it a couple of times. And I think on the whole, the Nationals at least were happy that he used his week as acting PM to go out to the regions. He announced some, water and road infrastructure announcements that was viewed positively. That had been constructive. But I think on the whole, Scott Morrison will be happy to be back at the helm. But he's back from holidays.
Do you think those positive announcements about water and infrastructure were perhaps foreshadowed by the comments that he made earlier in the week?
Look, yes, I'm not sure whether, it quite, I guess, fixed what he'd said, but... Certainly, it wasn't a glowing week for him, I don't think.
No, but of course there is some good to come out of it at least. Now, yeah. Liv, moving on to another topic, and this is one that the Premier Gladys Berejiklian spoke about just an hour or so ago. Nowhere in New South Wales is deemed a hotspot now by the Commonwealth definition, and despite that, borders are still remaining closed. Does this show a lack of respect that the other states are having for the federal model?
Look, I think so. I mean, all we've seen is an ad hoc approach. Over the past couple of weeks, we've had Victoria closed off to Greater Sydney and Brisbane at some points and had its own residents stranded interstate. We've had South Australia, Tassie, ACT, closed off to... Greater Sydney as well. It's all just been a mishmash. And I guess as Gladys said today, she really wants some kind of consistency, and she'd like the other states and territories to follow her lead, where it's kind of more of a hyper-localised response, where you're just shutting down to where there are active coronavirus cases. Now, Victoria has said today or yesterday that they're likely to reopen to Sydney soon and follow the fact that, Greater Sydney is no longer considered a hotspot by the national definition. But I'm not sure whether that's more to do with mounting pressure on the Andrews government over allowing international tennis stars into Victoria when, its own residents are still stranded interstate.
Yeah, that does seem like quite the contradiction. It'd be frustrating for them. I think there's, this pandemic's been going on for a year now and we still have no consistency on what a hotspot is, and each state is taking it differently. But we'll move on to another part of the pandemic that is also causing frustration. The country has drastically reduced the number of Australians allowed to fly home, and that was in a bid to slow the spread of these mutant strains of COVID that we're seeing out of particularly South Africa and the UK. And for most parts, that has been welcomed not only by state and territory leaders but also by the public. But what perhaps I didn't really foresee this coming, I'm sure that the state leaders probably did, is that it no longer becomes viable for private companies and airlines to fly because they've got so few passengers. And Emirates has decided that they'll no longer be flying to Eastern Australia, obviously because of that. Liv, this is making it even harder for Australians to get home.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually have joined a couple of Facebook groups for stranded Australians overseas, and there's a huge amount of frustration and anguish at the fact that they can't get home. And when National Cabinet moved to half the travel caps, they were upset. And now with Emirates choosing not to fly into the eastern states has just compounded that anguish. Fortunately, Acting Foreign Affairs Minister Simon Birmingham yesterday said that the Commonwealth will charter 20 repatriation flights. I think it's a step in the right direction, but there's still a lot of uncertainty out there, and I don't think that will bring everybody home. But then again, we are having to deal with this, these new virulent strains.
Yes.
And I spoke with Jane Halton last week. Now, she conducted a review on behalf of the government into mandatory hotel quarantine systems, and she has backed this sort of pause on travel caps. And she says it's going to give the states and territories enough time to ensure that the hotel quarantine arrangements are sort of more as watertight as they can be. So I guess we're dealing with quite a few issues there, and hopefully by mid-Feb, the states and territories will be really confident in their hotel quarantine arrangements, and hopefully these new virulent strains don't leak into the community.
Yeah, even Gladys Berejiklian did say earlier this week that she believes that those variants will actually become the dominant strains, which is concerning. But hopefully these extra few weeks does give them some time to, as you say, make those hotel quarantines as watertight as possible. Liv, the Australian Defence Force is dumping the troubled ARH Tiger armed helicopters and replacing them with the American Apache Guardians. Why is that?
Yeah, so on Friday I revealed that the government was moving to dump these troubled Tiger aircraft. Now, they've been beset by a number of issues. So, for example, pilots being gassed by fumes in the cockpit, rocket propeller pads falling off the sides of the helicopters, all manner of things, and they're very, very expensive to run. So the fact that they're moving to this American helicopter, the Apache Guardians, which manufactured by Boeing, has been largely welcomed. For example, Liberal MP and former SAS captain Andrew Hastie thinks it's a good move because it will bring the helicopters into line with those used by our strongest ally, America, and means that there'll be greater interoperability between them. So I couldn't find out from the government how much this new fleet will cost. They're still working that out. But I'm told that they'll cost a third of what the Tiger does to run, which is $34,000 per hour. Wow,
my goodness, that is a lot of money. Liv, let's take a look at one of the other more pressing matters of the week. A pigeon has become the centre of attention across the country. Talk us through Joe the pigeon and the saga that has unravelled this week.
Joe Burden has got to be my favourite story of last week. It was good to have something a bit lighthearted amid all the madness. So essentially, a Melbourne man, aptly named Kevin Sellybird, found this emaciated-looking pigeon in his backyard. And it had a tag on its leg that linked it to an American pigeon racing club, I think in Alabama. And so this bird made international headlines. Because it was believed that it had fled America in search of greener pastures in Melbourne. And Kevin named him after soon-to-be US President Joe Biden. Now, Acting Prime Minister Michael McCormack even weighed in and said, look, if this bird has travelled this distance, he's going to have to be exterminated if it breaches biosecurity threats, all that kind of thing. Now, fortunately for the bird, it's believed that the tag was actually fraudulent, and its Department of Agriculture yesterday said that Joe is most likely a local pigeon. So he's in the clear, and I think everyone's, can breathe a sigh of relief that he'll be okay.
Yes. I do find it funny, though, that someone's spending their time creating fake pigeon tags. That is somewhat concerning, but do whatever you like in your spare time.
And that you can apparently order them online. Who knew?
Yes, a whole new world. Thanks for the update there, Liv. Great to chat with you today and get your insight on what was happening in Canberra this week.